Welcome to episode 3 of the Through Married Eyes podcast. I'm here with Britanie and Sam Mohn. Say hi, guys.
Hey, what's up?
So,
Happy to be here.
They're here today to do our third interview.
Hi.
Say hey, Hazel.
Hi.
Hazel's with us. And that's their kid. We can get into a couple questions about y'all's life with her as well later on. But to start off, how long have you guys been married?
It will be 3 years next month, April 28th.
So how long was the dating/courting period for you guys?
We dated for 4 months before we were engaged.
And how long were you engaged?
About probably another 4 months. It was the end of November and we got married at the end of April. So 5 months, yeah.
Five months engaged?
Yes.
Gotcha. So how did you meet and how did your relationship begin?
Well, so the first time I ever met her officially, I guess, I was in high school and I was dating another girl who was friends with her. And so that was the only time really before during high school that we met. We weren't close, didn't know each other at all, and it wasn't until about 3 years after I've graduated high school that she reached out and invited me to church via Facebook Messenger.
The DMs, just not the Instagram. Those Facebook DMs.
Yep. So she, slid in my DM. She shot her shot, and yep, here we are.
So from your perspective, Britanie, how was it for you starting out?
Like dating?
Mm-hmm. Like starting out the relationship, meeting him and everything. Like, how was that experience?
So originally, when I messaged him, I was not messaging him to shoot my shot, you jerk. I was genuinely just inviting him to church. And then once we met, I was like, no, he's cute. So, I don't know. I had noticed a few of his posts were leaning more towards like godliness and not quite as vulgar as a lot of men his age. So I wanted to invite him because I had noticed that he got baptized at a Baptist church, and being a oneness believer, when someone's hungry, it's easiest to get them into the oneness truth whenever they are truly hungry for it. And I knew that if he came to a service and he heard my pastor preach, he would be like,
yeah, you could just tell.
You could tell.
Yeah. How long, I know this might be different for both of you, so both of you can answer this separately unless it was at the same time, but how long did it take for each of you to know that you wanted to marry the other person?
Honestly, probably a month or two for me. Probably about 2 months. Like I was really, really into him from the very start, but I did see like a real future about 2 months in for me.
Mm-hmm.
We started dating July 10th, and I was already planning to propose to her late September, early October. So
pretty quick.
Yeah. And actually, I guess more of a confirmation. So when I got baptized the second time, when I got baptized in Jesus' name, there was a man that was preaching, and I think he was over all the UPCI missionary. Like he was, I can't remember his title, but he mentioned how him and his wife got married like very quick after they started dating. It was like, I think 2 months when they actually were married. It wasn't even so.
Wow.
That was a very and that was, of course, he's an older man, so back in the day it was different, but that gave me more, I guess, confidence to follow
you
through.
Felt okay with going forward with it.
Right.
So what would you say were the best moments of your dating relationship, or if you can narrow it down to one moment that you would say is the best moment?
Oh goodness. Honestly, I think my favorite moment out of the entirety of our dating is the first time I actually met his parents. I had just finished up with I think it was the last day of VBS, and he invited me over there, and they had like a little awning that they have a bunch of chairs and tables sat under, and they have a beautiful country property, acres of land. And I remember getting there and immediately not feeling nervous. Like I knew at that point, like I truly think that I could marry this man, because it was more so like I felt I felt connected to his family as well. In past dating relationships, I didn't really feel like I had a connection with the family itself, and didn't even have an idea of what an in law could be. But whenever I met his parents, I felt genuinely like that could be my future. And that it wasn't even a date. He just invited me to hang out, and it was we I stayed till like 2 in the morning. We looked at the stars. We got to like really know each other and know each other's family and home life and stuff like that. And I think that genuinely is probably the best for me.
So before I actually began living for God, I always knew I desired to have Sundays. I wanted my family in church every Sunday, and even before like marriage or whatever, I wanted to have a woman that I was dating, and that church was that's where we were at Sundays. That's what our Sundays consisted of, and I was not living for God whenever we began dating, fully at least, but whenever we began dating, that's what it became. Sundays, I was driving to Porter, and I would spend the day with her and her mom and Ryan and the boys, and then we would go to church in the evening, and then I'd go home, and that was our whenever that began to develop and unfold, that was also really how I knew this is the woman that I do want to marry, and that to me is my favorite part, like having something that I've prayed for and dreamed of coming to pass.
So, kind of going back to what we had asked about before, I had forgotten to follow up, but I think this kind of flows really well into it. Is whenever I was asking you how long did it take for you to know that you wanted to marry Brittany? So, what things about her, and it kind of in tandem with what you were answering with this past question, what things about her really solidified in your heart and in your spirit that this is the person for me?
Mm-hmm. So may sound very cliche, but the amount of peace that I felt around her whenever I would hold her hand, she was so gentle, she was nurturing, and she nurtured my heart every time I was around her. And that in itself was something that I didn't even realize I was longing for many years before I met her. But that and then like I was saying before, we were she is someone that was already grounded in church, grounded in her walk with God, and so that combination was everything I needed.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So, on the other side of this, what was the worst moment of your dating relationship?
Ooh.
And how were you able to get through that?
Um, so like he said, when we first, I guess, got together, he wasn't fully in church, so he did still struggle with things from his past, and that included people from his past as well. Um, and I believe it was like the first or second week we were dating, he had prior plans to go on a birthday trip to float the river in New Braunfels, San Antonio area. And he, after the trip, had FaceTime me and told me like I need to tell you something. And he had told me that a girl from his past was on that trip as well, because the people he had went to, they're all like their families are close. It was more like a brother to him. So that person's family was also there, and he had said that she kissed him, and he, obviously shut it down. It meant nothing and all that. And at that point, obviously I hung up on him and I was like, okay, well, well, I'm done. Um, but I actually, this is insane, but one of my best friends, Nathan Hall, ended up actually being one of his groomsmen. He, I'm so sorry, when we had this conversation, I was in my car. I was waiting to go to a department meeting for the worship team. So Nathan had parked right behind me, and he saw that I was like sobbing in my car, and he was like, what's going on? And I kind of told him a little bit, and not to, point out flaws or anything to about Sam, but more so just letting him know. And he had told me, like, listen, you have to understand, he's not in church. He's going to struggle with his past. I'm not saying it's okay, but I am saying don't hang up on him and keep talking to him. Like, actually see what it is and why he made that mistake, and really listen to what he's saying. And if you choose not to continue dating him, that's fine, but you can't just shut it down. So that was really the first thing that really happened. And then a few weeks later, or not even a few weeks later, it was like a week or so later, he had told me the rest of the story, and that opened up another jar of worms that we almost broke up about, but we didn't. We stayed together, and that's the only time that I've ever even felt like he was unloyal in any way. Um, and he wasn't even unloyal in that situation. He had told me the full truth, the honest truth. He showed me the messages. He showed me all, like, any pictures he took, and he let me know, like, I did not put myself in a situation to betray you or your trust. So that was really the only major thing at that time, I guess, that was the worst for me personally. But
Sam, would you agree that that was the worst, or is there something else that comes to mind for you?
Oh no, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. That was I definitely thought it was over. I wasn't going to be able to come back from that, because not only was that the case, there was alcohol involved. There was, that's something that's been one of my main struggles coming into the church, was putting down the bottle. So, but by God's grace, we've come a long way. So,
Yeah. And whenever you guys were building back trust between each other, how was that process? Like, what helped you feel like you could trust him again? Not necessarily that he had put himself in that position, but knowing that that happened. I mean, I know how a woman's mind works. You think, oh, well, if it happened once, it can happen again.
oh, I know, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, how were you able to have your peace of mind? And then, Sam, how were you able to make sure that she was able to trust you, and you knew that you were going to be able to trust her in the future, making it go both ways, I guess.
Uh, Honestly, I will say that, like like I said, we were dating for only 4 months before we were engaged, so it really wasn't a long time. But for at least a few weeks to a month, I was still a little scorned, but I chose to believe him entirely. And I had seen him begin to make the changes himself. He unfollowed a lot of people, single women, women in general, he was unfollowing, and he was making sure that he wasn't leaving any doors open. He had never even looked at a woman. And a lot of times when you're with someone, you can kind of see where their eyes linger. Like, it, after that happened, I didn't feel like he ever saw any other woman. I felt like I was truly the only person he saw and wanted to see. And he has never since then given me any reason to feel like I wasn't enough for him. Because when that happened, that had never happened to me before. I had never experienced something like that. And to the fact that it wasn't even an super physical, he didn't like fully cheat on me. It was genuinely a very small thing that happened. And like he said, alcohol was involved. His judgment was impaired. It was something that he had struggled with for a long time. And after that, he began to make those changes. He slowly started to pull away from the alcohol and not allow himself to be consumed by it. And he began to distance himself from the people he used to hang out with as well. It wasn't mainly him, because the people you hang out with can influence you incredibly. And I saw him honestly just break away completely from one of his best friends, someone that he had been running the roads with for a very, very long time. And he kind of broke away from that. And it kind of proved to me that he's willing to give up something that he used to enjoy in order to create a future with me. And that has helped me tremendously to trust him.
So, pivoting a little bit, what were the distinctions between your spouse and past partners that let you know that they were very different and that you knew that it was going to be different with your future relationship?
Well, for me, I met a beautiful, amazing Pentecostal woman. She was definitely distinct from every other woman I've been with. I feel like it was, for me, completely different. She is the only godly woman I've been with, and she's helped me become a man that I didn't. Now, obviously, Christ has helped me become a man, but her as well, standing by me and being faithful, has helps me to be faithful to God, and hey, she has given me a strength that I didn't know I could ever have. So, if that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Brittany?
Um, he was definitely very, very different than anyone I had ever been with. Um, the the last person before him, like that I truly, there are people I had talked to before him, but the last like actual significant relationship that I had, it was about a year and a half. And I it was more of the young dopey love where you just want to be around that person. You're more so best friends than you know. And at that time, the boy I was with, he was, I think, 21 or so. And I it was a fight we always had. It's just like he wasn't going anywhere. And I understand at 21 you don't always have a life plan, and that's okay, but he had no real desires. He didn't have a big desire for his future. He wasn't really manly. He didn't know what he wanted. He planned on just living with his parents until he didn't want to live with his parents anymore. And that kind of always in the back of my mind was there, like, you're not really a man. And Sam is the first person I've been with where I'm like, this is what a true man is. He's hardworking and he provides and he's gentle and kind, and he knows about every trauma that I've had in my past and everything that I've dealt with. And instead of, I guess, walking on eggshells, he embraced it and allowed me to heal from it and help me to heal from things that I've been through. And he has never once made me feel like I wasn't seen or heard. Um, and then another big thing with him that I've noticed is that made him so much different is like any fight we had wasn't really a fight. Like, you didn't have to fight to hear each other. It was more so, let me tell you what I'm feeling and you tell me how you're feeling, and let's figure out what's going on and make it work, and we can, you know, get this over with. And that to me was what was so much different is, I grew up in a home of divorced parents, and the fights they had were the same. They didn't hear each other. At one point, they hated each other, and I was scorned from that. It wasn't even my own relationship, but it was a relationship that I saw that affected me so tremendously and off in an awful way, really. So I was really scared to have a marriage like that or have a relationship like that, and because of that, it developed other things within me that I had no idea were there until I met him, and I was like, okay, well, if I want this man and I want to keep this relationship, then I have to heal. He healed me, and I think that's really what was it for me. And I know it was really long winded, but
No worries. Yeah, that's awesome. So preparing for marriage in general, before you even met him and before you even met her, what things did you do to prepare yourself for marriage, if you did anything at all? And those things that you did do, did they work or did they not work?
Okay, so I didn't prepare in the ways now that I'm a married man should have prepared, but there are things that I did do. Um, I knew when I was growing up in high school, things like that, that I wanted to be a family man. I wanted to have a family and be there. I didn't want to be gone out of town from work. So I pursued, and it's, not some major bachelor degree, but I went to Lee College in Baytown to get a certificate of for instrumentation, and I knew that they work day shift. They don't work not nights and rotating shift like the operators do in the plants. That's been a really everyone and that's around me, my dad. They were like, you need to work in the plants, get a plant job, be an operator. They make all kinds of money. But I was like, well, I didn't want to be an operator. I want to work days and come home to my family every night. And so that is something that I did. And I've always desired to know God more. I didn't necessarily do it to the extent that I needed. I'm still doing that today, and I do wish that I come to the Lord sooner. To that way, I could have been a better man for Brittany and for Hazel. But um, I did pray that God would help me to be the man I needed to be. And I did pray that God would, whoever He wanted me to marry, that He would arrange that. Those are things that I did pray for. And the only way I knew how to pray. So, but that's really about it. And I'm thankful for those things. I do think that it has helped me to find Brittany, because I was genuinely seeking God. I want to be with the woman that you want me to be with, that you have created me to be the husband to, and I do wish that, I had a pastor that I allowed to speak into my life more before I met her to help me and shape me into the man that I am today, and I'm thankful for that. And Pastor McCoy, he's helped me tremendously, and he's took me under his wing. And I definitely wouldn't be the husband or father I am today without his voice in my life. But yeah, that's
Brittany, how did you prepare?
um so we did have premarital counseling. That is one thing that Brother McCoy asks of any engaged couple, and he I don't think I'm pretty sure he won't marry you until you have had the premarital counseling. I can't remember, but he does strongly advise that you get it. Um, but we went through that and got our certificate. But a lot of the things that were in there that we were really supposed to learn are things that we actually ended up learning together before then. We were sitting there, and they'd ask us, what music did your spouse grow up or your future spouse grow up on? But one thing I do think truly helped me and helped us is during premarital counseling, they actually made us take a a love language test. So you would take your quiz, and then afterwards you would try to guess what your spouse's acts, like if it's acts of service, physical touch, or whatever. And that really helped me because some of the things I thought he would like more actually were at like the bottom of his list. So for him, it was acts of service. He really like make me my lunch for work tomorrow. Leave me a cute little note in it. I want to come home to a yummy hearty meal. Like having my laundry done for me. Like that's what he enjoys is to be, I guess, taken care of and to be felt taken care of. And mine is quality time. I want to feel like you're listening to me and that you hear me and you understand what I'm wanting. We don't have to go spend a bunch of money on things. You don't have to get me a pair of $1,000 shoes, but actually just spend $20 getting my favorite flowers. It and that's more of a gift, but it's if you spend time with me, you know that's what I want. And that I truly do think helped with our marriage a lot because there's sometimes I'll do something and then I'm like, wait, that's my preference. That's not his preference. So I have to reel it back in and redo what I know he would like done instead of what I would have done.
So, how has your daily walk with God affected your relationship from the very beginning to now being married with a kid?
Yeah, with a kid.
I'll just say you can't make it without one. Any time that there has been a season where my prayer life is not, or my prayer life isn't where it should be, our marriage is a reflection of where I'm lacking in my walk with God. You know, the frustration builds, the tension builds in the house. We're not communicating as well as we need to be. Um, Everything else is the snowball effect of your communication and your relationship with God. And, you know, when we were dating and engaged, my walk with God was just beginning, and really, I feel like it wasn't firmly established until right before and during like when we got married. But having somebody that you're accountable to that's not your wife, you know, like, yes, your wife should be someone that you can be held accountable to. But I think that having a good friend that is blunt will tell you what you need to hear, even when it's uncomfortable. And having somebody that you can be honest and open with and say, hey, I'm not where I'm at. I'm not where I need to be, but, you know, just pray for me, help me, check in on me, ask me these certain questions. You know, you can give them a list of questions. Having just accountability, because our flesh is weak and we tend to not reach out for help when we should. And usually, in my past, by the time I've reached out for help, there's already been effects that have happened that I regret and wish, you know, if I would have just reached out for help sooner, if I would have just told someone, hey, I'm struggling to pray. Can you please pray for me? Help me, check in, you know. But that has been something I've learned. And I encourage everybody um, to do that as well. So,
Honestly, I feel like my walk with God is stronger now that I'm married. I have something to pray for, you know, even as dumb as that sounds sometimes, like if you're not sick or you're not looking for something that you don't have anything to pray for, but when you have a family and you have a husband and you have goals for your future, you have something to pray for. And having him in general helps me because like for him he can wake up in the morning before work and he'll pray and then he'll go on about his day. Me, which I mean I know I could but I don't, I get woken up by Hazel every morning. So when I wake up with her, I get breakfast ready and then I'm doing laundry, then I'm doing dishes, and then I honestly forget to pray. And by the end of the day, I'm in a bad mood, I'm irritated, I don't want to talk to anybody, do anything. And then he'll come home and we'll eat dinner and he says, "All right, let's go pray." So we go to our spare room and we pray for 30 minutes or so. And I know that doesn't sound super long, But whenever you're stuck in the same house with a kid who gets into everything and like you're doing the same thing over and over every day, just praying and taking 30 minutes to yourself at the end of the day truly does help, and it helps you the next day as well. um but he keeps me honest, and like he said, having someone to tell you things that you don't want to hear. I know he was talking about friends and accountability partners, but Sam is my accountability. And if I have an attitude, he'll tell me, hey, like, I understand you're frustrated, but I need you to calm down. Like, I know that's not something you want to hear. Or if I don't want to go to church, he'll make sure I go to church, because he's like, if you don't want to, that's when you need to. And he keeps me faithful and striving for more, because I'll see how he's used, and it makes me want to be strong enough to be his wife, because I truly think he's going to further and higher places, and if I'm not ready for that, I'm going to drag him down. So I just feel like having each other and praying for each other keeps you so faithful to the house of God. So
Yeah.
I just want to add one thing as far as accountability. Accountability is not effective without honesty. I don't know if I stated that clearly earlier, but you can have somebody that you're, oh yeah, everything's okay, everything. But if you're not open and honest with who you're accountable to, then you're not accountable. So I just wanted to reinstate that if I didn't already.
Yeah, for sure. Because otherwise, if you can't even be honest with somebody who wants to help you, then you don't really want the help.
Exactly.
You think that you can handle it on your own, and in that regard, they're basically wasting their time. You're wasting their time.
Exactly.
And so it's so much better to just be honest. I mean, even in my personal life, I've seen that where the moment that I become incredibly vulnerable, I mean, even with Brittany, we've had, she's such a good friend of mine, and we've had so many really good, deep conversations where I'm very open and honest about my flaws, and she never judges me. She is there to help me and to be a strength. Mm-hmm. She gives me advice whenever I may not even want to hear the truth. That's how I know she's a real friend. She tells me what I don't want to hear. And so I can be very thankful for that. And so I completely agree. Honesty is exactly what you need when seeking good accountability.
Right. And most of the time, whenever you do talk about the things you're struggling with, when you're talking to that person, there's a good chance they're struggling with that same thing.
Yeah.
So,
or they can feel it.
Yeah.
And they already kind of know. They've kind of already seen the signs, and so they didn't want to bring it up themselves. They were just waiting for you to say something.
Right.
That's a lot of the time. Even with, I'll Sister McCoy, she always checks up on her ladies. And there have been times where, unfortunately, like if I'm going through something and I'm not where I need to be, I will actively avoid my pastor and my pastor's wife because I'm disappointed. And I feel like I would just be a letdown. But there have been times where she'll catch me, and then I'll sit down and I talk to her and I realize, like, my goodness, like you already knew. But instead of judging me or kicking me off of things and making, you're listening to me and you're loving me through it because it's things you've been through, and it's how you knew what I was feeling because you've seen it and you've dealt with it before. And running from your flaws doesn't get you anywhere, because they're eventually just going to catch up with you. You're going to get in over your head. And if you struggle with anger or frustration, or you lack patience, and then you throw yourself in Sunday school when you lack patience, and you're trying to teach these kids and they won't be quiet, it's going to flare up, so you can't hide your flaws. You just have to be honest about them and work on that, because more than likely someone has the same testimony. Mm-hmm. And they've gotten past things, whether it be something in their past or it's something, a characteristic or whatever it is. They will be able to pour into you a lot more if you're being honest with yourself. And because there's a lot of times where we don't realize we need help until we're burnt out and we're like, my goodness, how did I get here? And it's because you're not honest with yourself. Because don't get me wrong, praying absolutely helps you, but having people to talk to and be like physically present, and having someone talk back to you is also very refreshing. So,
Yeah, and one thing that you said reminded me of how even in Alcoholics Anonymous or groups like that are helping people with addiction, they always say something that we all know, even if we've never been to a meeting, is the first step is admitting that you have a problem.
yeah.
And it's the same thing with our flaws and our issues. I mean, like you said, if you struggle with something like patience, the first step is admitting to yourself and to God, I struggle with having patience. And there's no fault in that. If anything, that is where you have to start.
Right.
Because if you don't, then you'll just end up in that same cycle of becoming more impatient or whatever it may be, and then you self implode and hurt those around you as well as your own personal walk with God.
Confessing your faults one to another, and that is truly where more healing takes place from your past. You can forgive others and you can somewhat forgive yourself, but until you can openly talk to somebody, receive their feedback, receive their affirmation almost, and not affirmation of what your mistake, like obviously they know it's what you did was wrong, but just hearing them, or having someone restore you with grace, is such an important thing. So
Yeah, in that verse you say, it says not just confessing your faults one to another, but also praying one for another.
Yeah.
Because whenever you confess, that all that you talked about was perfect. And then you can take the step of, well, they told me they're struggling with this. Now you have somebody that is being able to be an advocate for you, who's able to pray with you about these things. So that's all super, super awesome. So when you were trying to pray about your relationship, especially leading up to marriage and knowing this is a commitment that I'm going to be making for the rest of my life, how did you know or differentiate whenever you were hearing the voice of God or whatever feelings that He was giving you, and trying to communicate to you that this was right and there was peace, and differentiate that from your personal feelings and desires that might have been selfish, like, oh, I really, really like this person, which is not a bad feeling in and of itself, but your feelings can be very deceiving. So how are you able to differentiate those two things?
Well, I think you really hit it on the head, is the peace part, because when it's from God, you don't have to question it. You don't have to make excuses for it. It's from God, and you just know because it rests in your spirit. I will say, in past relationships, the reason I ended my serious one probably not even a full year before I started dating Sam, I we had no real problems in our relationship. We didn't fight, we didn't argue. There was nothing really that we went through, but I didn't have peace. I would wake up and think to myself, like, I didn't see you at church today. Oh, well, I didn't feel like going. No, the man I'm going to marry is going to be at church, and I would just wake up anxious about my relationship and not know why, because there was no real reason to feel that way. But with Sam, I wasn't anxious about it. And I knew that God had something for him and wanted him to go deeper and go further. And I knew that I wanted to be with someone who is willing to hear the voice of God. And regardless of if it's a difficult journey or not, you're going to trust it and you're going to, obey God. And finally finding a man who truly obeyed him was just peaceful. It was easy to tell. And I understand some people they're not gonna feel the same way, but for me it was really easy. I didn't have any difficulty knowing that this was the person for me. So
I will say, because your feelings are never uh, going to, your feelings alone will never lead you in the right direction. But my pastor approved what, his blessing was on it. My parents had their blessing on it. her parents had the blessing, our friends. I feel like whenever that is the case, and that's not always, completely a yes as either, but for me, after we were engaged, I had already asked for everyone's blessing, and I had been praying about it, of course, but there was a time that I told God, God, I'm giving you the opportunity, I'm giving you the space to intervene. If I'm ignoring your what you're telling, if you are trying to tell me no, I give it to you. I'll give you the space to intervene and to change the situation. But every time I gave him that room to intervene and say no, or anyone at that matter, I had nothing but there was never a reassuring no. It was only a reassuring yes. So I did my best to say, you know, yes, this is everything I want, but God, if it's not what you want, I will step away. I give it to you. And I think if you don't have that mindset, then you're not allowing God to speak to you a yes or a no.
Yeah. So moving on to a few of the more lighthearted ones. What were some of the first things that you noticed about your spouse when you first met them?
I mean, she was just drop dead gorgeous. I mean, I pulled up to the church, and man, that was it. That was it for me. I knew, you know. No, she So the first thing that I noticed was she was not. So I guess this is somewhat of a previous question too, but previous women I've been with were very, I guess, rowdy, very loud, very, and I know that's, uh, you wouldn't necessarily think that whenever you see me that that's a woman that I would have been with, but yes, she was very meek, very quiet. She really didn't speak to me a whole lot the first time we met. Uh, we talked, don't get me wrong, but it was not like I could tell she was a little shy, and it was something I knew I was going to have to chase her a little bit. Like she wasn't just, oh, yep, she was going to throw herself on me. It wasn't just, it was something I'm going to pursue. And was very thankful for that. She, just very graceful, very meek, very polite and nice and genuine. And I guess I'm buttering you up right now, but
Right. Um. Well, I guess like honestly, physically, I he was handsome, obviously, like duh. Um. But I noticed that I don't know, he seemed like confident in himself, but not cocky. There's a big difference between being confident and being arrogant and cocky, and he was not that. He was confident, and he knew what he wanted when he wanted it. And honestly, the best part, or the thing I feel like every woman should look for, is someone that you can be feminine with, because there's this big stigma recently, within recent years, like women are just no longer feminine. They act more masculine. They're the bold ones. They do what they want when they want, feminism, whatever. But I feel like the reason for why that's happening is because the men, or not even men, the boys nowadays, they aren't manly. They're not masculine. They don't, you know, if I can't be feminine with you, then it's going to inevitably make me become the masculine part. And when I met him, I knew that I could be feminine. I could be meek. I could be mild. I could be quiet and have someone who could speak for me and protect me. And for the first time, I felt like I was protected and that I would never be hurt, regardless, like whether physically, mentally, emotionally. I would never be hurt by him. And that was really just, I felt it immediately. And I also noticed like how he was with my little brothers. Um, it warmed my heart, honestly. He's so quick to volunteer to go outside and play with them, or flip them around on the couch, or play games with them, whatever. And even like at the church, he's the first one to volunteer to do something that someone else doesn't want to do. And I think that just really was the most attractive thing to me, is that he's incredibly selfless, and he is never selfish. In fact, there are sometimes I have to tell him, you need to you need to be selfish for once. You don't have to say yes to every single thing, and you don't have to do this for everybody. And I think it's just really awesome being with a man like that.
So aggregating all of that in just a little bit. So how would you describe your spouse in just a few words, like 3 words max?
Patient and forgiving and attentive.
Nurturing, graceful, and meek. And she also is she pays attention to detail like no one I've ever seen in my life. And she touches my heart when she does that. So.
If you can't see this right now, but Brittany's getting red. Yeah, so this is the third interview that I've done. So I've asked this question to 3 different couples, and it's so funny. And I think I had said this in Leah and Jonathan's interview, but whenever you describe each other, the way you describe her and the way that you describe him, it is like a perfect reflection of who even I see from an outside perspective. Like, if I were to see the words nurturing, graceful, and meek, yeah, I mean, that describes you perfectly well. That's the vibes I get from you. And same thing with you. I mean, I think Sam is probably like the most freakishly patient person I know. Like, I don't know how he does it.
I've noticed a lot of men have like anger issues. You know what I mean? Like, they're not patient at all. Mm-hmm. Like, at all. And unfortunately, and my dad's gotten a lot better now within very recent years, but my dad was not patient. He was very quick to anger. He would yell very quickly. He'd get frustrated, and he would just go berserk. It was insane. And so when I met him, it was a lot different, because I kind of almost was like, what's wrong with you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not getting angry, so you must actually hate me, because you don't care. And you have to teach yourself, like, no, that's just patience, baby. You just gotta figure that out.
Yeah, it was probably refreshing for you to be able to experience that.
Very. And even like I was saying earlier, like, we don't fight. Like, you don't have to fight each other tooth and nail for something. Like, you can just have a conversation with him. There's been one screaming match we've gotten in our entire marriage, and we've still figured it out. And I had, like, in the middle of the argument, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna grab the keys and go. I'll be back later. And then when I came back, he was asleep in the spare room, because he knew that I would kick him out of the bed. And then the next morning, he took off of work so that he could stay home and apologize to me and talk through the argument we had. So even in the time that he wasn't patient, he was still kind and very considerate of my feelings. So I don't know. I feel like that'll make any man attractive.
Yeah. So, and I think also a trend that I've seen is that it sounds silly, but a very healthy question that you end up asking yourself in a healthy relationship, and knowing that you're in a good relationship, is, there has to be something wrong with you. Like, no, like why do you seem perfect?
There's a downside. You're a psychopath. You gotta be. Like, you're gonna wait till I get married, and then you're gonna flip a switch. church. Like,
Yeah.
you.
No, which is like a real fear. And not just like from me, but I know that there's a lot of people who feel that way, is that whenever they've experienced, whether growing up in their childhood or from past relationships, they've experienced a level of toxicity, then they get into something that's really genuinely healthy and good for them. They don't know how to, they don't know how to handle
They
it.
look for reasons, and then it ends up creating an issue in the relationship you're having, because you're actively looking for a reason to not like this person or to not fully.
You're imagining problems.
Yeah.
So, Pastor, and he's probably told you this, but if you're not ready for marriage unless you have had a fight, unless there has been something, because you have to learn how to fight. And I think that part of that, especially, well, definitely on both sides, but especially for a man, because like she said, like a lot of men are angry. Whenever a man is in a fight, he's in an uncomfortable situation. Most of the time, his true colors will show. How he responds to tribulation, how he responds to a trial, or even just confrontation. You can see something you don't like, and you confronting that about him. Will his pride puff up, or will he be humble enough to say you're right? And like that is something that absolutely should be seen before someone decides, okay, I want to marry this person.
Find a man, find a woman, whoever you want to be in a relationship with, find someone that can say sorry,
right?
That can apologize and admit when they're wrong. Because I've experienced those who can admit when they're wrong, and I've experienced those who absolutely cannot admit whenever they're wrong.
You shall know them by their fruit. The fruit does not lie. And there is a difference in, natural, human kindness and human love, and the supernatural kindness and whenever you see somebody who's getting mistreated horribly, and they're still, like the Bible says, bless them who despitefully use you, like and are cruel to you. Like, if someone is still kind and can still contain their moral values and what they are in Christ, that even in those situations, that's something that you can't fabricate outside the Spirit of Christ. So
yeah, exactly. So what Bible passage or verses reminds you of your marriage? Like, whenever you think of your marriage, what place in the Bible, whether it's a story or some verses, that remind you of it?
This is gonna be so basic, but the love is patient, love is kind.
First
That's
Corinthians
literally
13, yeah.
it. I know it sounds silly, but that truly describes the man I'm with. He, like I said, is patient, and he's kind, and he's considerate, and in a world where there's so much toxic masculinity, he's just right. He'll defend his home and his family, but he will also be gracious and loving, and that's the love he gives me, is an abundant amount of patience. And um in recent years, I've dealt with a lot of chronic illness, and not really knowing what day I'm going to feel good and what day I'm not, what day I'm going to lay in bed and do nothing. And instead of getting frustrated, I'm sorry, instead of getting frustrated coming home to a filthy house and dishes that have been there for 3 days, he comes in and he checks on me and covers me up, and he goes and he does the dishes. He doesn't have to say anything. And when so many men would yell at you and despise you and start to resent you for that, and I don't know, there's just an abundant amount of patience that he has, and kindness, and so many people lack that now, that it's almost like a treasure when you find someone who truly is like that. So
yeah, it's a big reason why the vows are the way they are whenever you get married, in sickness and in health. You have to still be faithful and still treat them as if they were healthy, even if they're on their deathbed.
Yeah. And that's actually something that did pop up during our premarital counseling. Is Brother Ainsworth is the one who did it, and he was talking about how a lot of marriages will go through it if one of you gets sick. You don't really know who you're married to until you have taken care of each other, and it does suck because I can't control it, and I I don't know. He 100% holds up to every vow that he's taken when so many fall very short of it. So, yeah.
So mine may not be the typical answer, but and I guess this isn't necessarily our marriage as a whole, but my wife in general. The way, whenever you asked about the scripture, I immediately thought of the way that Mary Magdalene worshipped whenever she broke the alabaster box and anointed Christ with it. And that was just the way that she worships and seeing her go through the most, not even, not only painful, but frustrating. She's in a moment where she's not in control of what's happening to her, but seeing her still endure, seeing her worship, and she still puts me, she puts me first still, and I'm not saying first altogether, but she puts my needs before hers, even though she has many needs at this moment. And that gives a man everything that he could ever want. She's miserable in this season and trial of her life, but she's still putting me and Hazel first, and she's still taking care of us, even when she doesn't feel like she is. She is, and that would make any husband want to just give her the world. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, how would you say that your upbringing shaped your views of dating and marriage?
well, I think both of us really have we both had examples of what we did not want our marriage to be like. And before I go into this, my mother and my father are actually very great people. They are not in church, unfortunately. They're not living for God, but they are as good of people as you can get without them fully living for God and fully being in church. You know what I mean? And they have taught me so much. They have my father. A lot of my patience and how my traits come from my father. And they've had a rough marriage. They're still not necessarily happy, but I think that's only because they're not living for God. And one day they will be, and God's gonna bless them and turn their lives around. But that they have given, you know, they don't fight the proper way. They don't communicate the proper way. And I'm not trying to dishonor my parents by any means. I'm just, kind of delving into what I experienced as a kid and what the example of marriage was. And that is just, my sister as well. She was like, Sam, like, I want to have a better marriage. And I want Hazel to have a better marriage than me and Brittany have whenever she gets older, of course. So that's every parent's goal, is they want their children to have better lives and better marriage and better family. And I think the Lord will definitely do that. But let me pass this over to
So, like he said, we both have examples of what we don't want for marriage. I have parents who divorced, and in all honesty, he had parents who should have divorced. Staying for kids is not always the best excuse. So, my parents, they got pregnant with me in high school. Fun fact, yeehaw. And then they got married because of me. And they were not at all ready for marriage, and they came from broken homes as well. So they raised me and my brother the best they could under the circumstances they had. They didn't have much to look up to. I grew up pretty poor. Uh, they would work multiple jobs sometimes, and off and on lived with my grandparents, and then living in those houses unfortunately caused a lot of the trauma in my childhood and what I've dealt with. Um, this actually came up pretty recently, but when my parents were still together, we would hop back and forth between my dad's mom and my mom's mom. And when we would live with my dad's mom, um, I would be sexually abused. It happened for 3 years, my childhood, and I slept in the bed with the man that did that to me. It was my grandma's husband. Um, that kind of forced me to grow up a lot quicker and have a very flawed view of what intimacy looked like, and opened doors to things that a 6 year old, 7 year old, 8 year old should not know about, shouldn't be dealing with. Um, it created a lot of the problems I had with my parents because, I would be reserved and I wouldn't want to get to know new people. And a lot of the time I wasn't shy, I was actually just scared to be, I guess, offered up to another person. And they had no idea. They had no reason to know or even think of it. But um, unfortunately, that did have a huge effect on every relationship that would come off of that. There's certain things that if Sam gets too close to me and it's at like a weird angle and he breathes on my neck weird, like I immediately revert back to that place. And we have had to have talks about like, hey, you can't hug me from behind, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, because it just, I know you would never hurt me, but I immediately just revert back to this child, and um going back to my parents' marriage, they struggled with a lot of things, and they would yell and fight and argue, and they would go into a different room thinking that we couldn't hear them, and they would scream at each other, cuss at each other in just a ridiculous amount of things. And I just grew up knowing exactly what I didn't want, what kind of man, what kind of woman. I didn't want to be my mom, and I didn't want my future husband to be my dad. And he, with his parents, there was a lot of things that happened in their marriage that he was able to look at and say, you know what, I would rather be single than ever have to deal with that. And because of those things, we've had to put boundaries in our own marriage with our parents. My mom and dad aren't allowed certain privileges. My or his mom and his dad aren't allowed certain privileges just because of the type of people they are. Not that they're bad people, but different people have different boundaries and are okay or not okay with different things. And I think that is definitely something that anyone should talk about before getting married, because you don't want to go into a marriage and have a kid and then end up arguing because you didn't discuss which parents were going to be the go-to babysitters, or which parents you didn't even want your kids being watched by. uh, and that ends up being a major issue in a lot of marriages, is in-laws. And fortunately, I have wonderful in-laws, and I feel like my parents are good in-laws as well. But just because you're a good person doesn't always mean that you're not going to give good advice. uh, uh, but anyway, good people don't always make good decisions. And I think that it's a very good choice to talk about your childhood trauma, talk about your parents' relationships, and what you expect from your parents in the future and marriage. So,
So, if you had any, who were your mentors during the dating period and how did they help shape your outcome? And if you didn't have any mentors, that's fine.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily have mentors in the way that we should have had mentors. That was one thing I was to go back and change. I would absolutely have some mentors, but we were still, even her, she was still very new into church. Her mom was as well. So, but Brother Ainsworth is somebody that I would regularly talk to. Uh, Brother Michael Huff, he sat down with us and actually gave us a Bible study together. Um, and then of course Pastor, but that they weren't necessarily mentors in the way that like a young couple who is courting or dating, whatever you want to call it, that is checking in, keeping them accountable, because we did make mistakes that while we were dating that if we had mentors we wouldn't have made. So
So, how would you say your financial situation has affected your relationship? Is that something that you talked about while you're dating, or did you kind of wait till marriage to really find that out about each other? How have you handled budgeting? Those kinds of things.
so whenever we were in premarital counseling, that is something that Brother Ainsworth went over. He mentioned how divorce is one of the main causes of divorce is because of finances and not being on the same page. And don't get me wrong, I thought we were more on the same page before we got married than we were, but I mean, of course, you can't fully be on the same page until you are married and dealing with going through the finances together. Uh, but we definitely had hardships. I had a good paying job, since before we were married, but I was renting a house with my sister and with one of her friends while we were dating and engaged, and I was in Baytown, so I was only paying 1/3 of rent, and I did not budget whenever I was single and all that. So whenever we got married, I thought, oh yeah, it's easy. We'll throw together a budget. Well, growing pains, of course. Uh, we were just it just really it could have caused a lot of issues, but Brittany is very selfless. She does not require, like, she doesn't ask for all these things. She doesn't expect all these things. She's very simple, and that truly helped me because I just needed time to work through our budgeting system. And I sat down with her and got it out. I reached out to Brother Brad Bertrand, Brother Ainsworth again about budgeting, and and they helped me get an idea of what I needed. And that is something I suggest you do before you're married. Like if you're a man, already have a budget in place with what you're making. That is just my advice because I was 21, so I didn't do all that, and not blaming it on age. A 21-year-old can probably be more financially smart than I am now, but it could make or break, especially early in a marriage. I do think it just makes everything uh, either better or a lot more tense, a lot more stressful than it needs to be. And a budget, I've learned actually, and I think Brittany is on the same page with me as this, but you can fast and not indulge in food, right? You can withhold yourself certain days of the week for a period of time, and we began to look at budgeting and money in that same way. We would keep a little bit out of every paycheck for our spending. That way we wouldn't just indulge in whatever we wanted and then be broke at the 2 days, 3 days into our paycheck. And we had to do that until I made more, until we got things figured out. Now we spend a little more on each other. But that was something I thought was pretty neat.
Honest, this is gonna make me sound so stupid, but he's the one who like is in control of our finances. I never really have a desire to buy many things, so when I do we have enough money. We make sure that our savings is taken care of, and um, we even when we have money, we act like we don't. That's one thing I think that's really helped us keep money, is even though we do have money to go out to eat, we'll say, oh, we can't really afford that. When in reality, we have plenty of money to do that, but it's just more of a, well, let's not spend $50 getting food from a place that we're not going to finish the meal from, and instead go home and eat a grilled cheese, and then that's $50 that you can save, and that $50 starts to add up very quickly. That is something I think should be mentioned beforehand, especially with budgeting. How often are you going to eat out? How often are you, going to go on dates? What are you going to do for those dates? And have that planned out. Because when you go on a date, you can go to the museum and then get food after, and that could be $200 depending on what you're doing. So I think a lot of it, with us at least, is eating out, because we kind of just do a little bit of everything, and then especially after church services, everybody wants to go out to lunch, and then lunch starts to add up pretty quickly whenever you're doing it every single Sunday.
Yeah, don't fall into the pressure of
Yeah,
that.
and there's nothing embarrassing saying like, hey, we can't really afford that right now, because a lot of the time there are other people who are going just because they feel obligated to, and they can't afford it either.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, listen, we didn't budget for this, I'll catch you next time.
Yeah, don't just throw it on the credit card, and then that credit card bill adds up.
Yeah, we try to not have anything on our credit. I will say, unfortunately, because of my health, there have been a few times that it's put us in a bind. Hospital stay, an ER visit. Recently, I had to have dental work done on an infected tooth. Ended up costing, after everything was done, $1,000. Like, that's not. People don't just have $1,000 sitting, ready to spend. Not everybody has that, and even if you do, you don't want to spend $1,000 on a tooth. So you have to make sure that you do have savings. There are so many people now, a lot of my friends don't even have savings accounts, and I think that's insane. You should be. You never know when you're going to get laid off from your job, or if your car insurance goes up or something like that. You have to be prepared. You have to have enough money in there to suffice for, like, if you were to get laid off, I'd want us to have enough money in savings to help us for 2 or 3 months before we completely run out.
I mean, so Dave Ramsey, he offers or advises the 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up for all your bills. That's what your bills cost each month, but times that by 3 or 6 months, for that amount of time until you can, if you do get laid off, or if there is something that comes up. And we try to keep that much in our savings. And there's times obviously where we don't have that much, but that's part of working your way through finances, especially at a young, we're in our early 20s with a toddler, a 2-year-old, and we have a house note. So, balancing that has been a challenge tremendously, but I'm just thankful that I have a selfless wife that has helped me to navigate through this. But not only being on the same page with what you spend, but like how you spend. Like if there's Christmas coming up, you don't want to just always drop that amount. And I know it's kind of getting deep, but whatever. You don't want to just always drop that amount right there at the end of the year. Like she's advised and that we start Christmas shopping early, and we just do like $100 here starting. I think last year we started in August or July. Wow, yeah. So that's something that as a man I would not really think of, and she honestly does all the Christmas shopping. So she's really good at it, and I let her take over that. And I think if you're not on the same page financially, she should have, even though she doesn't work, which is completely fine. When we got married, I told her, I want to be able to provide for us, and you only work if you want to. It's not something you have to do. If you're not enjoying your job, you can quit, and, she can tell me no, even though, yes, I am the one that technically makes the money and brings it in, that doesn't mean anything. Your wife should, if you are a man that is providing a single income for your family, like your wife absolutely has every right to tell you no. And she needs, and even if she, so at first she didn't want to be involved in the finances and the decision making and stuff like that. But I said, no, this is your, just as much your money as it is mine. So I wanted to make sure she had access to it the way that I did and had the right to say no or yes, or, hey, I need this, and I give her the ability to make decisions in our finances. So
So this is just out of curiosity, but do you guys have a threshold for each other of like a dollar amount that, under this dollar amount, you don't really have to like ask to spend
Yeah.
that money, and then above this dollar amount, it's like, okay, this needs to be a discussion between the two of us.
Yeah.
So for me, I just, for a while when money was really tight, anytime I would say if I was at work and I wanted to go buy lunch, I would just basically get permission.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done that here recently, just because we've actually been pretty comfortable financially, and things have been okay. But at that time, when we first got married, I had a new manager, and he didn't allow us any overtime, and it was restricted, and so that put, I was used to making a certain amount, but that put a strain on us. But yeah, I do recommend that there is, say, if you're online shopping, but pretty much for the most part, anytime she buys anything, she calls me and she lets me know, and it's just communication. You can never over communicate.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible. And communication on all aspects, all categories is so important, because you may think it's something small, but your spouse may think it's something big, so you communicating that may not mean much to you, but it does to them. And that is, when you communicate even the smallest details like that, anytime you purchase anything, that is just, you're protecting yourself from hiding anything from her, or vice versa.
Yeah, and I've seen in many people's relationships how habits like that, those kind of things build a lot of trust, a lot of financial trust.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be something that you're super consciously doing all the time. Like, okay, I have to do this thing in order for her to trust me, or in order for him to trust me. It's just all of these little habits that you form over time that build up that trust in general. So that whenever you ask, it's like, okay, do you trust your husband? I mean, without a doubt, I know that I don't even have to ask you that question. I know what the answer would be.
Yeah, but it's just having that open communication and honesty, and even there's been times where I've messed up and it's something little that I could have not not mentioned, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but she notices when I am vulnerable and I say, "Hey, I did this, I purchased this. It's probably a little too much money. I'm sorry, I didn't communicate." But you're holding yourself accountable, and I try to do my best with that, because, like I said, our flesh is weak, and and especially with money, I could sit there and I could throw $1,000, $2,000 on a credit card, and she wouldn't really know about it. It is something that, because on our bank account for a debit card, she gets notification every time there's a charge, but it's not the case with the credit card that we have. So she could go in and find it and look, but at the same time, I do my best to not use it at all. And it's only emergency, or, we make like little payments on it, to keep it going, I guess. But anyways, that's,
Yeah, for sure. So we had kind of gone over this a little bit earlier in regards to arguments and disagreements and how those are handled, but more focusing on the forgiveness part of it. You had talked about your experience while you were dating, but specifically talking about your marriage, how has forgiveness played a role in your day to day lives and in handling those arguments and disagreements?
I will say, when you feel like you're with a partner who isn't forgiving, you begin to hide more things from them, and especially your flaws. Um, and luckily, because we communicate so well, there's not many things that we have to ask forgiveness for. But I know something I've struggled with for a very long time is just being, I get frustrated quickly, and I don't know how to communicate my frustration. So sometimes I raise my voice, but in reality I don't mean to. I don't realize I'm raising my voice until I do it, and then he shuts down because he's like, you're not, you know, you need to respect your partner. So if he yells at me, I'm not even going to dignify it with a response. And he's the same way. You need to respect yourself enough as well. Um, but being able to, put your pride to the side and be like, hey, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to say that. It came out wrong. I just hope that you'll forgive me for that. And they do. It just makes it so much easier to continue to have an honest relationship, because forgiveness plays a huge, huge role in your communication. Because if I mess up and I feel like he's not going to forgive me for it, it's just going to keep me from telling him what's going on. And it honestly kind of plays the same role in like your walk with God. If you feel like God isn't going to forgive, then you're not going to take your problems to him. And then that's inevitably going to hinder your walk. And it's kind of the same way with marriage, is just you have to trust each other because you are one flesh. So whatever I do is going to affect him, and whatever he does is going to affect me. And when you communicate and you put the boundaries down and you're honest with your faults and you ask for that forgiveness and you receive it, it just makes communication so much easier, and it helps to prevent you from making the same mistakes again. Um, and it could be something super simple, but it also it prevents you from making those same mistakes, but it also helps you to notice I guess the signs of those mistakes happening. For example, and this isn't an example of him. He doesn't struggle with this at all, luckily. But some men have porn addictions, and that's just it's a very big thing nowadays. But if you can see the signs of what that addiction is, and you can tell when your partner is watching things like that, and you can pick up on it, you can help prevent it as well.
Mm.
And a lot of men, they will go and look for that type of thing because they feel like they're not being seen in the relationship, or you're not having an open communication between each other of like what you're looking for in that aspect of your marriage. But if you look for the signs, and you kind of learn them and you communicate with each other, ask for the forgiveness and go ahead and like talk about it. Because a lot of the times when we make a mistake, it stems from something else. And one mistake can turn into a huge, huge thing down the road. And, I feel like if it's super small and you start small and you are honest about it, it keeps you from making big mistakes, especially like with the porn. If you continue to watch porn and you don't admit that you're watching it, you're going to start getting on those apps, and you're going to start talking to people, and then you're going to start meeting up with people, and then next thing you know, you have a full blown affair because you were honest about it. And this is something I've heard from other people. I'm very lucky that my husband doesn't, because I can imagine that that would be something very very hard to deal with. Um, but I do want these podcasts to be open and honest, because that is something that is really really big right now. And there's a lot of men in Christianity. There's pastors. There's youth pastors. There are people who you would never think are dealing with that are. And I do think that forgiveness does play a big role in recommitting the same sins or just the same mistakes. Because not every mistake you make is a sin, but some things can start small and just eat away at you, and then you are down the road and you have no idea how you got there. So
And to add on to what you're saying, uh, so I will say I'm not I am not struggling with porn now, but I have in the past, and she knows. She knows. We've talked about those issues, But as a couple, and the women struggle with pornography just as much as men do nowadays. So it's not just a one sided thing. But if there is a situation where a man or woman is struggling, your partner need, in order for you to get over and get past that struggle, you can't do it without your partner's support, without your partner's grace. I know there is going to be trust that's broken, and that's going to take time to build back, but you will not move forward and become better and get through it without your partner's support and grace, because the Bible says, let the spiritual restore those with grace, those who are dealing with sin. If you're being shamed over what you've done, over your mistakes, you're gonna only just waller in your mistake and self pity, and you won't ever get through it the way that you can, unless you have someone that is there to support you, to help you day by day. It's a journey, So
Yeah, and I know that I've heard so much of the shame that comes with that, and I can only imagine how much greater that might be in a marriage. And so let's say that there's somebody that's listening right now that struggles with that. And let's say they are married or they're in a dating relationship or whatever, maybe even if they are single. But specifically for those who are in relationships, you had said that it's so important to have your partner there and for you to be open and honest with them about your struggles so that they can help you through it, especially if you're married. But how would you say is the best way to get over that shame? How can you as an individual be vulnerable enough and feel comfortable to get past that shame and talk to your partner about it, making that big step that can be incredibly difficult for a lot of people?
you're just gonna have to swallow your pride and talk to your partner. That's really all there is to it. It's gonna be painful, it's gonna be hard, but once you do that, that's step one. you know. Or if you don't want to talk to your partner first, talk to a friend, talk to your pastor, and let that be step one. And then, once you can talk to somebody on the outside, if you don't have enough courage to start with your partner, then, you know, start with them, let them pour into you before you can talk to your partner. But I will say it's a testimony. Talk about it. Don't let it just be something. That's the reason I took the mic, and she said I don't struggle with it now, and she's right, but I did struggle with it before we were together. And there's times where we were dating where it was something that came up and it was an uncomfortable conversation. I had to go to her, tell her, hey, look, it's not something I've been doing for weeks, but it's just something I got this random urge and I did it. And I'm going to tell you about it. And when you talk about these things, other people can relate because it's such a common thing nowadays. You think that you're the only one. You think then Satan will use that. He'll make you feel like you're so small and that how could you ever think of doing such a disgusting thing, especially as a married man or whatever the case is. But the truth of the matter is there's more than you think that struggle with it. And so when you talk about it, you're giving others courage to talk to their spouse. Whenever you say, hey, I talked to my spouse and my marriage has thrived since we've gotten through it, and my marriage is now thriving. You're giving people hope, and that's the power. That's how we overcome, by the blood of the lamb and by the word of our testimony. And if you don't share your struggles, and this is not just with pornography, this is all aspects of issues, and I try my best to. There's some times where I do pass up on opportunities, and I'm trying to do my best to be open. I think having that humility allows people to connect with you as well. Like, they see that you are humble enough, because whenever you're prideful, you don't want to admit your faults, but when you can confess your faults to one another, you can tell your testimony. It just does nothing but strengthen the body of Christ. So
I just wanted to say, um, it it's one of those things that is considered taboo now that I feel like in the next few years won't be taboo anymore. Much like how mental health within the last few years has become a major aspect. You think that because you are going super well in your faith and you're super spiritual or whatever, that you can't deal with things mentally, or you can't deal with depression, you can't deal with anxiety, you can't deal with addiction, and that's just not true. At the end of the day, you can be depressed, you can have a porn addiction, you can still be walking with God and secretly going and having a beer at the end of the day. Like, I feel like what we're doing here now, what you're doing here, is opening the door to things that don't have to be taboo anymore.
Mm-hmm.
People are all about sharing their testimonies until it's something that they're ashamed of. And in reality, you should never be ashamed of something that you've gotten over. And even if you're not over it, you're getting through it. And whenever you share it with other people, it leads them to tell you how they got through it, how they got over it, what they did, what they surrounded themselves with. And I feel like, the porn is one of the things, but there's still people who are alcoholics, who smoke cigarettes, who are vaping, who are snorting cocaine. Like, there are people who are cheating on their wives. There's so many things. Obviously, I don't want to normalize those things in Christianity. That's not what I'm saying at all. But being honest about what you're going through is going to help you surround yourself with people who can get you through it.
Yeah, you don't want to necessarily like normalize it for the sake of justification. You don't want to feel justified in what you're doing
Yes.
just because oh, this person struggles with it too, or
Yeah.
whatever. It's not for that purpose, but the reason we're trying to bring this to light and not shy away from these topics that are really sometimes uncomfortable to
Yeah.
talk about is because we need to normalize it in a
Yeah.
way that is strengthening to one another.
Yeah.
It's like, I struggle with this, you struggle with this,
Yeah.
instead of us both having a pity party about it, or both saying, okay, well, since we both do it, we can just continue and
Yeah.
not feel bad about it. Instead, we're able to relate on that level and say, okay, we know exactly what we struggle with. We can keep each other accountable.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that I'm not alone in my struggle anymore,
Yeah.
so that I don't have to feel so ashamed about it. So I know that I have somebody there that is cheering me on, and I can cheer them
Yeah.
on as well.
And there's also a lot of the times some of those things stem from childhood. Kids get exposed to things like that. Like, me personally, I also have struggled with porn. Not recently, but before him, like, it was something that was normal, and it was something I was exposed to. I didn't ask to be exposed to it. I was exposed by another friend, and then beforehand in my childhood I was taken advantage of. So it was a door that was opened when I was 6 years old, and then it just turned into something else, and it grew into an addiction to something that I don't even enjoy. I didn't enjoy. I didn't want any part of it. But at that moment, I felt like I was in control of that instead of someone else taking advantage of me. I felt like I was watching stuff I wanted to watch, and it was for me instead. And I know, like, if you haven't struggled with it, you won't 100% understand what I'm saying. But there are actually a lot of people who have been sexually abused as children who end up addicted to porn in the future, or addicted to sex in the future,
or homosexual in the future.
Yeah. And even if you were molested by a man, you end up not wanting to be with a man, you want to be with a woman.
Yeah.
And
those
it's
things
just
are so rampant. I mean, you said that you were exposed at 6 years old. Personally, I was exposed whenever I was in fourth grade. I mean, these are young ages. I think as of recently, I don't know if it's the most recent statistic, but the most recent that I heard is that the median age of exposure at this time is like 10 years old.
That's insane.
I mean, it's incredibly insane. And that has to do with just the more the internet has advanced and how just more accessible it is. I mean, you don't have to go to a store and buy a magazine anymore. It's like you just open up a phone and tap in a few words, and you're right there already. And it's horrible.
And even you can find it on your social media.
Oh yeah. Without very much trouble at all.
Oh, absolutely. Like, a lot of people, they'll check their spouse's search history, but in reality, you can find it on Facebook. You can find it on Instagram. You can find it on Snapchat. You can find it. if you're looking for it. I had a friend, and her husband dealt with it really, really badly. And she she realized that he wasn't, she thought he was doing better, because she was looking through his phone and couldn't find anything, but in reality, she went and she was like, "Oh no, he can find it other ways."
Mm-hmm.
And then he eventually came to her and was like, "Listen, like, I haven't been honest. I'm finding it somewhere else. I haven't, you know." And then luckily, because he admitted it and because he admitted he had a problem, now their marriage is flourishing. He doesn't struggle with it anymore because he was able to be open and honest about it, and he went to, like, his leadership and was like, "Here, I'm dealing with this and I don't want to deal with it anymore."
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I wanted to say is, oh, like you said, because it's so accessible and now, people are exposed to it at such a young age, it also makes you so much more protective of your own children, because a lot of the sexual abuse, molestation, any of that is peer on peer now. It's not always the creepy old dude that you don't trust. It could be your best friend's child. And it makes me personally, my daughter's not staying the night anywhere. Her friends are more than welcome to come over, but they're not even gonna sleep in the same room. You know, I was exposed to it. I know how that has affected me and still affects me to this day. I would rather be the annoying mom who is overbearing and overprotective any day to protect my child from the things I was exposed to. And the things I was exposed to created so many issues mentally and physically, also. So, yeah.
So this kind of relates to what we just talked about, but just in general, how have boundaries from the very beginning to now impacted your relationship? How have your boundaries changed, if they have at all, especially transitioning from dating to marriage? Not just like, I mean, of course, there's physical boundaries, but not just talking about that, but emotional boundaries, boundaries with family, which we did touch on before, but you kind of get the idea.
So my boundaries haven't necessarily changed, and mainly my boundaries with her have been, you know, the way that we speak to one another, especially when we're not happy or upset, frustrated. Because to me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that affects me the most. You can just about tell me anything you want as long as you're speaking calmly and respectfully. I can handle any criticism just about, and I've received it at work from previous people that it was very hurtful, and I've gotten through that, and I've realized, they're not even living for God. So I mean, how can I expect them to hold to a boundary I have with someone who is living for God? But anyways, I will say, like, communicating expectations, and that's something that is and been important. It's not necessarily a boundary, but how can they know what you what is a line that can be drawn if it's not communicated? Communicating, and you know hey, I like when you do this, and if your wife is doing something that you like, if she's washing the dishes, like, tell her thank you. I don't know. That's I guess that's all I have as far as that.
um, I will say, when we first started dating, unfortunately, like he mentioned previously, we didn't have role models. We didn't really have anybody who was holding us accountable, and unfortunately, that did lead to doing things before marriage, and we didn't stay honest to each other. Or, I mean, we stayed honest to each other, but we didn't respect each other the way we should have, and that led to, having premarital sex, and then that was a big thing that we dealt with, or dealt we dealt with. Um, but he told our pastor, and it it helped him was one of those things, hey, it's taboo, but I need to admit it and get it off my chest. And whenever he did that, he felt so much better. But also, I was having some issues at home. I was I can't really say it without, telling other people's business, but I was not having the best time at home. I It was not good for me mentally. It was not good for me spiritually, emotionally. I was being just taken advantage of, and I eventually moved in with him. We didn't communicate it. We didn't say anything about it. I just started sleeping over, and then I stopped going home because I we didn't have the best role models. We didn't have people looking out for us. And that's why it is so important that you do find those people to keep you honest, because it is very, very easy to end up living in sin. And unfortunately, because we did that, it did take a toll on the beginning of our marriage,
Mm-hmm.
because it was that night, the what you're supposed to have together as a married couple that you're supposed to not be allowed to do as a dating couple, recording couple, it took away it being special. It was no longer special anymore. And we had to get back to a place where we had to take back control of that. So those boundaries are very important, and they're very hard to keep, but it's important to keep. And it's taboo to talk about that. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, who did do things before marriage, but they have never told people that they did. Um, so like I said, it's one of those taboo things that is a lot more common than you think. Shouldn't be justified, but it is something that you can be honest about, and it's a mistake as long as you reel it back in and you are determined to not do it again, and you need to set
Yeah.
boundaries. And that's just one of those that unfortunately we didn't keep, and we didn't take as seriously as we should have. So
Yeah, I like how you had mentioned that it can be taboo a lot of the time and it should be talked about more. And I think also specifically because of the very reason that sex in and of itself is not a bad thing. It is not an evil thing. It actually is the opposite. It is a great thing. It is wonderful
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's in the confines of marriage. It is a gift that a married
yeah.
couple alone are able to share with each other. And it's like one of the one things that makes that relationship specifically so incredibly special, and it brings you two together. But whenever it's outside of that, it can be incredibly dangerous to your dating relationship because of all the different things that can come of it. I mean, yes, it's sinful, but it's not just I don't do it because I know I can't do it, but the repercussions of it are you have so many mental issues that can stem from it, and your relationship takes a nosedive because there's so much confusion and shame that happens. And thankfully, you guys were able to recover from it and were able to be better because of it. And that's wonderful. A lot of relationships aren't able to survive that, though,
Yeah.
sometimes. And whether it was a wrong relationship or it was just way too persistent, that it just caused that right relationship to become wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever any sin is introduced into a relationship, it causes issues.
Yeah.
It's not just this sin,
Mm-hmm.
any sin. And so this has to be treated just like lying. It's like if you and your partner constantly lie to each other, that isn't a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with this, on the exact same level. There's not greater sins or
Yeah.
little sins or anything like that. It's on that same level. So it's less of, I wish people were to not view it as you can't do it because the Bible says no. It's because no, I don't do this because I respect this person, because I
Yeah.
want to protect them, and because true love comes in the form of protection. It
Yep.
comes in the form of saying, I'm abstaining from this for my good and for your own good, so that our marriage is special. Like you said,
Yeah.
it makes it so much more special.
Yeah. Um, I also wanted to add, it's very easy, which this is why Pastor recommends that engagements are very short, because once you're engaged, you're like, okay, well, this is the man I'm marrying. What's the big deal? When in reality, you can get engaged to someone and then 2 months later, it's not what y'all want anymore. And then you have taken something that was supposed to be clean, and you have taken apart and dirtying that. It's no longer pure, and um, you never know until you are married that you're going to marry that person. It could be the day before and you decide that it's not for you. It's happened more it's happened a lot. There are people who think they're ready for marriage, and then come the wedding day, you get left at the altar. So it's very, very easy to kind of get in that mindset of that, well, this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. I know that I want to marry him. He knows he wants to marry me. So what is the big deal? It is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we didn't take that as seriously as it should have been. And luckily, he's my first and only. It's not something that I've done in past relationships, but it could have easily have not been my first and only. He could have just been someone in a long line, and a lot of people, it's like you said, it's just, it is what it is. And mm-hmm. you should be able to talk about it without feeling, well, it is wrong, but you should be able to talk about it in a way that helps someone understand that it is wrong, and not mm-hmm. just
the why behind
well, because it. I say so, or because the Bible says so. But in reality, you're just making something that was supposed to be pure, and you're turning it into a lustful, carnal, disgusting experience when it's supposed to be something special and unified whenever you were coming together as one person. And unfortunately, whenever you do that before marriage, even if it's the person you're going to marry, it is no longer special.
Yeah.
And it's no longer that ceremony between you two, but it's just something that's rushed, and it's not thought through, and it's not special anymore.
Yeah, and practically speaking, I mean, just point blank, man or woman, don't be given husband or wife privileges to somebody who won't commit to a husband or wife relationship. You'd end up just playing house whenever in reality that commitment isn't there. So, ladies specifically, because I feel like this happens more often with ladies. It still applies to men, but more often with ladies, do not give yourself completely to somebody who will not give themselves completely to you. In the sense that do not give a man everything that he wishes and desires of you if he's not willing to commit to you and to call you his wife proudly and openly.
You shouldn't have to prove yourself over and over to someone, because you should be that person should look at you and know that they want you in all of you. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't have to prove yourself to them. It should be something that just happens naturally.
And if somebody is pressuring you into that and saying, well, in order for me to feel satisfied in this relationship, this is what I need, run. Yeah. That is not somebody who is wanting to honor God. That is somebody who is after their own selfish desires, whether it's a man or a woman. If somebody that you are in a relationship with decides that they cannot continue that relationship without sex, or not even just like the full act, but if they say that any of your boundaries have to be crossed in order for them to feel satisfied, that is not love, that is lust.
Yeah, no, I agree. And for some reason, whenever you asked me the question to begin with, I didn't initially think of this as being, I was thinking of a boundary within marriage, not before marriage. But yes, that's whenever that is violated before you're married, you have a veil over your eyes over what their intentions are. You have a veil over your eyes of what God's will is. And God, at that rate, it makes it a lot harder for God to speak to you.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful that while we were in that, we were still very, I hadn't even received the Holy Ghost yet. And I was searching for it. And I was in this sin. And it wasn't until we knelt down and prayed for God to forgive us and for us to move forward. And it was after we were already engaged, not long after that, I did receive the Holy Ghost, and God began to work on my heart and transform my mind like never before, at a much higher level. And if you don't have a mentor or even a friend that checks in on you or can say, hey, like, where y'all, or y'all are staying up late, like, hey, what's going on, like that, it just protects yourself.
Yeah.
And like she was saying, it makes it not special as it should be on your wedding night whenever you do become one flesh. And that's just things that we've had to deal with and come to terms with. You still have to reap the consequences of your sin.
Yeah.
And we did, but thankfully, our pastor and pastor's wife have been very gracious towards us and has restored us. Because there is a shame and a weight that comes with it that you really can't get over without their covering and without their grace.
Yeah, not only do those things cloud your judgment spiritually, but even just on a very basic biological level, as soon as that happens, your hormones are everywhere. You are
Not thinking right.
no, you are just on a very basic physical level not able to have complete, clear, logical judgment.
Yeah.
Because not only are your emotions invested in the relationship itself, your emotions and hormones and all these chemicals in your brain are much more invested and much more connected than they were before. And so that can lead to all those problems that we talked about. What you said specifically.
Yeah. And so if you are having sex before you're married, and it's not even like someone you're engaged with, but you are still becoming one flesh with that person, even though you're not saying like your marriage vows. And then if it's just a one-time thing with that person, whatever, and you move on, that's being ripped apart. And so small pieces whenever you rip a piece of paper in half, it's not a clean rip. There's little pieces of you that are being left with that person that you don't even realize. And it tears things within inside of your own spirit that, God meant for you to keep for that one. And it's such a powerful thing. Sex is such a powerful thing that it had to have such a strict and powerful boundary of marriage, to keep it holy as it's supposed to be.
Also just wanted to say, like he said, whenever you're doing this with a person that you end up not marrying, not only are you leaving with pieces of them and you're leaving without pieces of yourself, but you can take on whatever spirits that have been tormenting them. You can take on things that you were never supposed to struggle with, that was never in the cards for you, because you went against what God's will was. There is a person that we know, and she was a partier, and she would sleep around, and she was telling me about how after she had slept with this particular guy and he left, whatever, that next night she began having sleep paralysis and seeing the spirits and being held captive in her own bed by something that was never supposed to torment her, because she couldn't say no to her flesh. And it is just so easy to be led by your flesh. Our flesh wants what it wants, and when you're not prayed up and you're not looking to people who have your best interest spiritually and at heart, then you end up leaving with things you were never supposed to leave with, and you end up dealing with things that you were never ever supposed to deal with. And it's just the consequences of your own actions. And I truly wish we would have been more careful, and I wish that we would have been more clear in our boundaries. But unfortunately, we did what we did, and that's just how it is. But luckily, we can be open and honest about that and talking to people who may be dealing with it, because there's some people who haven't had sex yet, but they're doing other things, but you're still doing things you're not supposed to do. That's what it leads to different things. So it's not just sex. There's a lot of other things that you can do physically with each other that's not sex. but can absolutely still make you unholy and in need of cleansing. So,
and the wages of sin are death, and that's not just talking about like an actual you dying and it being over, but it's talking about a spiritual death.
Yeah.
That even if it's something as simple as the death of your joy and your happiness, the death of the glow that you have around you, the death of your relationship with God.
There's also the death of ministry.
Yep.
One of my friends, she was in a relationship that she didn't keep 100% pure, and I don't even think they actually slept together. I think they were just doing other things, but she 100% music ministry was her thing. She loved it. And then out of nowhere, she no longer had a desire. It was gone. She couldn't sing on key. She would forget the words. She wouldn't be able to actually concentrate on the song. And I 100% think that's because she allowed things in that shouldn't have been there. I think you can ruin your ministry and you can ruin your entire future with these things if you don't, get rid of that relationship and do the hard part, because sometimes that isn't the person you're supposed to be with. Like I said, I got very lucky with Sam, but that's not always the case for everyone. It's very easy to fall into that. And there's there's everything wrong with it, but there's nothing wrong with admitting that you were weak at that time. And because more than likely everyone you talk to is going to have a story about that. There's probably not a single person in this world who hasn't struggled with lust. Doesn't mean they necessarily slept together before marriage, but you can still struggle with lust in your relationship without having sex. So I do think it can be absolutely detrimental to your spiritual walk and the things that you're called to do.
And it starts with your thoughts. It starts from up here, and something that Pastor had said before is your thoughts become like habitual thoughts, as in you continue to think about them. Then those habitual thoughts become your words, and then your words, they become your habits, and your habits, as in actions, they become your lifestyle. And it all started with just entertaining thoughts.
Right. But there's grace, there's restoration on the other side of it. If you're listening and you are in the middle of it, I promise you, Satan wants to make you think that you're going to have everyone against you and you're not going to be able to, your reputation is going to be destroyed. But I promise you, there's grace, there's hope, and there's restoration whenever you confess your faults one to another. And whenever you find somebody for help, there is safety in a multitude of counsel. So,
condemnation is one of the greatest tricks of the enemy that works so often, but when you think about it for just 2 seconds, you realize that it makes zero sense. Because the whole time that you're struggling with the temptation, he's whispering in your ear, oh, it's not that big of a deal. You should just go for it. You should just a little bit of fun won't hurt. You can always pray for forgiveness after this.
right.
And then if, whenever you do fall into that temptation, then immediately the tone changes. How could you do that? You sinner. How unrighteous are you? You're never going to be able to get back with God. It was like complete hypocrisy.
Yes.
And it doesn't even make any sense. So yes, do not fall into the trap of condemnation. It will lead to nothing but shame and a vicious cycle. So instead of feeling condemned, feel the guilt.
Right.
But allow that guilt to draw you closer to God.
Exactly.
To draw you closer to forgiveness.
And people think that they can't have ministry after something like that, and that's just so not true either. Like, yes, it does. If you stay in it, your ministry won't be the same. You won't be able to be as effective. But afterwards, that's under the blood, and God absolutely can use you, if not even more, because of what you've been through.
Yeah, and for those listening, if you want something that is very in tune to what he just said, talking about failures and mistakes, I would recommend going to the Porter APC website, that's our church, and going to our live listens where they record all of our services. And there is a sermon recently within the past few days Today is what, March 15th or so? I think it's March.
14th.
March 15th.
Okay, it's March 15th. So I think it was this past Sunday or Wednesday. There was a sermon that Brother Kerry Jones had preached, and it was Life After Failure. So the title should be in that recording. So if you want to have a really, really good sermon to listen to that's more focused on that, I would recommend going and listening to that because it was absolutely awesome. So our final question: what advice would you give to those who are single and serious about having a successful future marriage? This is the exact audience of not only the podcast, but the book that this is being written for.
I would say, if you are like dating and you're actively looking to to date, don't back down on your boundaries and don't settle for less than what you want. But at the same time, don't make insane, like, I guess, wants for somebody. You're not going to marry a perfect person. No one's perfect. But like Simone said, you don't ever settle for someone who's actively telling you that your boundaries don't matter, or that in order for you to be with them that you have to get rid of your boundaries, and that's just not true. You can find someone for you, just don't settle down, and actively continue to strengthen yourself. There was this one time, one of my friends, she's actually still single, but she was talking about how she was just wanting a boyfriend. She wanted to find a husband. She wanted to start a family. And one of the ladies that was in the group looked at her and told her, maybe your husband is at a higher level and you're not there yet. So don't stop reaching for more, because God never is going to want you to just stop and be idle. He's going to want you actively looking and searching and climbing to a higher spot. And just maybe the person you're waiting for is waiting for you at that higher level. And as long as you just go at your own pace and you continue to allow yourself to be used by God and hear God and stop allowing what you want to come in between that, it will, I believe, allow you to open other doors and to find a relationship that suits you.
Most likely, from what I've experienced and seen, you're not going to find the one you want to marry whenever you're actively looking for that person. If you're just sitting around waiting and looking for that person, that's not usually how God works. When it is whenever you are pursuing God with everything, not looking around, whenever He brings that person that you need in His timing and in your best timing that you may not even realize. But not only that, but just have somebody. I think Brother Tuttle, he was just talking at it might have been the youth conference, but he said he had his dad, one minister or elder in his life, and then one of his best friends. And he said that, there was these three people that if just one of them said no, he would end it with whatever woman he was with or planning to be with, no matter what his feelings were. And I thought that was amazing advice, having three people that you are giving access to tell you no, and that you will submit to that no, no matter what your thoughts or feelings are. And, and to make sure these are wise people, not just anybody, and then having these people actively be accountable in your relationship as well. So that's my advice.
Well, that's awesome. Well, that concludes the interview. Thank you guys so much for being here. It was wonderful getting to have this conversation with you guys, and just thank you for contributing to this book and to this project. So that concludes our time together.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So tune in next time for episode 4, and we will talk to you guys later.